is really amazing once you discover how important the pineal gland is in our anatomy and how that has been manipulated to control us. It becomes quite spectacular. So basically what the pineal gland is a frequency receptor, right? Just like our eyes are frequency receptors, they pick up the frequency of the visible light and convert it into something that our brains understand. The same thing with the pineal gland, except it's embedded in the middle of your head. You don't need a lens. It just picks up all the other frequencies and converts them into, understandable information. Well, that no longer seems to be the case. But there seem to be some people that are awakening and are regaining the ability to use their pineal gland. What does this all have to do with ancient civilizations and stone ruins in southern Africa? Everything. You'll see that these ancient civilizations understood frequency and they understood energy and how to convert frequency into energy. And that is actually amazing. Even the simple formula that Max Planck uses, that frequency equals energy, starts to come home, and it becomes interesting how ancient civilizations and modern physics overlap very, very comfortably. Sound and frequency are the common denominators of pretty much all religions and all creations. And very quickly you realize that in the beginning there was the Word. The Bible tells us that God said, "Let there be light." The Word of God. It is the sound of God that created the universe and all things in it. And in Hinduism and in Eastern philosophy, it's the primordial sound, the Om or the Aum, that created all things. And very quickly, do you not only realize that sound seems to be the primordial source of all things in the universe, but very quickly you reconcile Eastern and Western philosophy that gave birth to all these religions, and also understand and lay the foundations for this thing called laws of nature, sometimes referred to as sacred geometry. And boy, when you say sacred geometry, some people go running for the hills because it's got the word sacred in it, right? And it's some wishy-washy religious thing. No, we can't get involved in that. We don't understand sacred. I don't know what that means. Well, sacred actually is a Greek word that means fixed. So we're dealing not with some wishy-washy religious principle, but we're dealing with fixed geometry as it's fixed by the divine creator, the primordial source of all things. And suddenly, everything changes, and we realize that there's only one law of nature. Only one law, and that is the law of nature. The 6 aspects of Om in Eastern philosophy, 6 sound frequencies. Om Mani Padme Hum, for those of you that do chanting. And suddenly, in the symbol of Hinduism, you start seeing, and many of these other symbols, you start seeing these beautiful shapes that are actually the representations of sound manifesting itself in physical form. And this is a beautiful moment. This goes back to the 1700s with the Chladni plates, and then Hans Jenny's research in the 70s, 60s and 70s. It's been fantastic. Go away and have a look at that. You'll see the most phenomenal things come to life. And then you realize that these 6 aspects of Om are perfectly represented in sacred geometry or in the biblical tale of the 6 days of creation. There you go. 6 circles around one, and on the 7th day God rested. And you realize that we're combining all this stuff into the laws of nature that starts to show us the source and the origin of these things. And it all seems to come from sound. And it's interesting to see that the number 6 thing is not just restricted to, Christianity or Hinduism or so forth, but even Egyptian religion talks about the 6 aspects of the eye of Horus, or the eye of Ra. And then you realize that the 5 basic Platonic shapes, the 5 primary frequencies, the 5 primary shapes that seem to give rise to all other matter and all other frequencies are all inextricably linked to the 6 days of creation. First there was the void, and then you see the 5 following days of creation. And you see how all this starts to fit together as the essence of God moved across the waters and across the void and so forth. And there you go. They're the 6 aspects of the eye of Ra. So it's not just restricted to Western and Eastern philosophies, but also Egyptian philosophy and way beyond. You start seeing it popping up in other ancient civilizations as well. And we're actually seeing the number 6 when you start, when you finally get exposed to the wonderful work of Willem de Swart in The Secret Numbers of God. You'll understand that this number 6 is very important because it actually represents the physical world and the representation of the manifested and the imaginary world that we perceive around ourselves, this thing called the nature of reality. Vibration frequencies, harmonics, resonance, that is the stuff that makes up the universe and everything in it. Why are some numbers so significant? Well, sound seems to be primordial seed. We've discussed that already. And you realize that, see, these ancient civilizations used all these numbers. And they didn't just throw these numbers out, like have a board meeting and say, well, let's use number 3 all the time. It'll really confuse the crap out of future generations. Yeah. And number 7 is a cool number. We'll use 7 as well. And then, hey, 12's good. And then what about 22? Okay, let's use these numbers and see what happens. These guys knew exactly what they were doing. They understood the laws of nature, and they applied it to everything they did. And that's the phenomenon that we find when we start analyzing the structures and the monuments in Egypt and everywhere else on earth. And that does not exclude South African ruins and the ancient civilizations of South Africa. In fact, they become highly visible in that. And the number 3 is the Holy Trinity. And it can be represented in so many different ways, right? The way that you can explain it in music and in frequency is 3 notes make up a harmonious chord, right? The first note is just your note, your reference point. Your second chord is your reference point, your starter note, your reference point. And only when you play the 3rd note and complete the Holy Trinity, you complete the trichord and you complete the harmonic chord. And then you can manipulate that chord and you can, make it a flattened 3rd or augmented 7th, and you can manipulate people's emotions. Look what soundtracks do to people. They make you weep in a movie. It's not the visuals, it's the soundtrack that makes you weep. It's the sound that harmonizes and vibrates with your soul and with your heart, that moves you. It's not the visuals. Number 7 and 8. What does number 7 and 8 got to do? Well, there's 7 whole notes in one harmonic resonant octave. The 8th note is the end of that octave and the common boundary between the one and the next octave. So it binds them together. And in that notion, you realize that that's how all these vibrational harmonic frequencies and these bubbles of the universe are linked together by the common boundaries of their harmonic resonant frequencies. The number 12 and 13 does the same. When you take 12 spheres, you place them perfectly around 13 spheres so that they all touch. 12 disciples around Christ. You see the symbology coming out of that, and you realize that all comes back to the laws of nature, not to the laws of science or mathematics, the laws of nature, sacred geometry. And 12 notes in one harmonic resonant octave. That's the 7 whole notes and the 5 semitones, right? The black notes. Together, they're 12. And the 13th note is the boundary of that harmonic octave and the common boundary between the next one. And then you suddenly see this number 22 appear everywhere. 22, you start seeing everywhere the moment you start researching it. And you realize that, how dumb can we be? 22 is one of the cosmic numbers because 22 over 7 is pi. And that is the common denominator between all circles and all spheres. No matter whether they're this big or the size of the universe, their common denominator number is 22 over 7. And they all share that number. And that is their ratio by which they are linked. And when you get deeper into this ratio thing, you realize that that is the fundamental thing that we need to pay attention to understand what ancient civilizations were getting up to. It gets really, really exciting. The deeper you get into this sacred geometry, wishy-washy religious stuff, right? Now, pioneers of sound, there have been a number of people in the last 100 years that understood this and embraced this and used sound and frequency to do all kinds of amazing things. But unfortunately, these people have been removed from the mainstream of society because their information was highly dangerous to the mainstream of society, right? Royal Raymond Rife in 1931 was quoted to be the man that found the cure for all disease. He also discovered or manufactured those first amazing microscopes that could see viruses and bacteria and living cells for the first time, that they could actually look at them. Obviously, they didn't like that. When he found the cure for all disease, you can imagine what the pharmaceutical companies did to him. They said, "You did what? You found the cure for all what?" "I don't think so, buddy." And unfortunately, he didn't get very far with his cure for all disease. And what did he use? Frequency. Sound frequencies and other forms of frequency. There's still a huge debate about exactly what kind of frequencies he used, but there seems to be some information that he used about 750 different frequencies to cure cancer and all kinds of other diseases, everything you can probably imagine. And then recently I found a guy in South Africa by the name of Paul Gravenstein. He gave me permission to talk about him and talk about his work. Well, he is the new modern day Royal Raymond Rife. He cures all disease and everything you can imagine in the field with the farmers, pests, insects, worms, viruses, you name it. And Paul he's a very simple, humble farmer who's just got this gift, and he knows exactly what to do. And the one thing he told me is that he uses more than 50,000 frequencies to cure all these diseases. And he's got the ability to identify frequencies of anything you can imagine. In my longer lectures, I speak in greater detail about how he works and what he does. But take a note of Paul, because we'll need to make sure that we build some sort of protective, energetic field around him before they wake up to his abilities. In 1888, John Keeley showed the world how the power of sound can be used to do all kinds of things. Lift giant blocks of stone, crush them into the finest kind of talcum powder, drill perfect holes with absolute precision and accuracy down to a fraction of a millimeter. He disassociated water with sound, and he did all kinds of amazing things. And he also said that the earth rings like a bell. And this dynasphere that he had, this musical dynasphere, was directly associated with the frequencies of the earth. And through the frequencies of the earth, you could tap into those and use them for a source of energy. And guess what? This is exactly what Nikola Tesla said a couple of decades later when he built his Tesla Tower. Tesla obviously gave us free energy. I heard from Andrew Collins the other day that one of his tests, he apparently lit about 20,000 homes in an experiment at one night on Long Island. 20,000 homes that he lit with his radiant energy from the tower on Long Island, his Tesla Tower. But he also said that the earth rings like a bell, and wherever you are on the surface of planet Earth, you can tap into that sound frequency and use it as an inexhaustible source of energy. Okay, these are all important clues. As you can see, we keep coming back to sound, right? And there's the Tesla Tower on Long Island, built 1902, and then brought down in 1917. And one of the things that I believe he did based on the work of Carmen Bolter, there are two possibilities. He either drew the charge and the current, or the energy fields, let's call it that rather, from the ionosphere, because he speaks a lot about the ionosphere in his research, or he tapped into the surface of the earth, which Carmen Bolter from Calgary University suggests, and he tapped into the sound frequencies of planet Earth, and he used that, and then he pulled it up to the top, and then he converted it into his radiant energy form. So one of the things that he did is also he created this light on the right-hand side, the cordless light. You pick up in your hand, and it lights up. You don't need any wires, you don't need any power source. It just picks up the energy from your body and it lights up in your hand. Now you think it's magic, it's well documented. He showed this off many times, and guess what? We can do that today. There's a company right here in Johannesburg called High Pressure Heating that does that. They do that with neon light tubes. They're in the wood drying business, and they got these long machines that they slide these tree trunks into. They tighten it up, suck all the oxygen out, suck all the air out, and they expose it to 13.56 megahertz. The way they test whether their machine is calibrated correctly and if it's going to work is by taking a tube of neon light, and they stand above the machine. And if the light lights up in their hand, they know that their machine is calibrated correctly and that it will work. So it's not magic. We can do it today, but we just don't apply it in our society. When I called them up and I said, well, why don't you use it in the factory and, offer it as a service, cordless, wireless lighting? They said to me, why? We're in the wood drying business. Those are the boxes we put ourselves in. What does this all have to do with ancient ruins and civilizations, you might ask once again? Well, it seems to me from my research, what I'll share with you during the course of this weekend, is that Tesla, Keeley, and all these others just rediscovered what ancient civilizations knew very, very well a long, long time ago here in Southern Africa. They understood frequency, they understood energy, and how to put that to use in all possible ways. Everything is just frequency, including your thoughts, so be careful what you think. You've all seen The Secret or heard about The Secret and all that kind of stuff. It's real stuff. It's not wishy-washy science. It's real breakthrough, groundbreaking scientific research. It shows us how our thoughts can do things and manifest our